All right, folks, I am headed to CrossFit. We're going to Reddit for a topic. This is from the Experienced Devs subreddit, and it says how to stop being the go-to firefighter for projects that I've handed off. I'm not going to read out the whole thing because I'm going to be late for CrossFit. But if you end up enjoying this and you want to consider sharing it back to the thread, that would be super cool, because I don't want to go posting my stuff on Reddit and then get banned from subreddits for self-promotion and stuff. But if you think it's helpful, then that'd be great if you want to share it. And a friendly reminder that if you want questions answered, leave them in the comments or submit them to DevLeader on social media, which is my main YouTube channel as well. And then I'll keep your information anonymous and make you a video about it. Okay, so this is an interesting challenge, especially if you have found that you're in a situation where if you're doing prototypes or you got to work on something early and then it got handed off, maybe it's even like a team change. And so I don't think that it's super rare. I think maybe depending on the type of work and the type of projects you've been working on, it might be more or less common. But I can totally understand why this is challenging for people. And if you haven't been in a position like this, just for a little bit of context, like some people might say like, hey, like, isn't that like a good thing, right? You're important, right? Some people might be thinking about the job security thing where it's like, hey, people have to come chase you down because you're so important for this project, and that means that they need to keep you around, kind of thing. But it's actually a bit of a pain in the ass, and it's distracting, and sometimes, like, because that's no longer your priority, especially like given, if it was a team change and you have like a different manager or anything else, like when it's no longer something that's supposed to be your responsibility, it can start to feel very frustrating. Okay, so it's not about just being important or something like that. It's like you feel like you want to do the right thing, which is help your colleagues, right? You don't, like, you're all working at the same place. You don't just want to be like, screw you, and then everything falls apart. So you try to help, and then get that out of the way. Then you get back to your own priorities. Now, the way that I've seen this kind of happen before and like seem like it's not getting better is a similar pattern to what I've talked about in other videos, which is like, in order to fix this, or to improve it, I feel like you need to, like, it needs to get a little bit worse before it gets better. So what does that mean? Well, if this is already something that's frustrating you, right, you probably want to spend as little time as possible on it, because the more that it frustrates you, the more that you're like, okay, like, get it out of my face. I'm sick and tired of working on this, sick and tired of this situation. Like, how do I just move on from this as fast as possible? But generally what happens with that is that you are kind of, I don't know a good way to actually articulate this. Like, instead of you showing other people, you're like just doing for them, right? So, hey, this doesn't work in this project, like whatever thing you built, like, we're confused, we don't understand it, we don't know how to debug it. And you're like, okay, like, I don't have time for this. So what I'm going to do is basically tell you to, like, screw off for a second, and like, I'm going to go dig into this because I can do it faster than you. I know where the things are. And then I will, when I come back up for air and have all the answers, and I'll share them with you. And then, so you do that because it's optimal for you, right? In terms of your time investment, it feels like the fastest way to resolve the problem, and you're helping them because you're giving them the answer. And then they go, great, thank you so much, you're a lifesaver, and then they disappear until the very next thing happens, and they're like, we don't know. And hopefully the pattern's a little bit obvious there, especially if you've seen me talk about this in other videos when it comes to mentoring and helping others. But this, in my opinion, it's very much the same thing. There's going to be some nuances to it, but the big challenge is that you're not actually helping other people understand it. And at the end of the day, if they're not understanding it, then they have to keep coming back to you when they need something done. Now, I guess like part of me wants to say, like, shouldn't we just assume that like it's their project now and like they should just be spending the time learning and understanding it? Yeah, I don't disagree with a thought like that. I think that depending on their circumstances, they might be getting pressured to keep extending stuff in the project, right? So they're just building new stuff on top of it, and then something else in whatever you might have been part of building before is having challenges, or they broke it and they don't understand how. So they're getting their own pressure where they're like, we have to keep moving fast to keep adding stuff into here. So please help. Or it's a live site incident, depending on what the product or service is. And they're like, we don't have time for this. And obviously, you don't want to be the person who's responsible for live site stuff on something that you don't even have ownership on now. But what ends up happening is that people have to come chase you down, right? So this type of thing, like I said, I think is a situation where it gets a little bit worse at first. Nice. We got rhymes. I threw myself off. So yeah, you end up spending extra time. I'm just thinking about someone writing a comment being like, dude, are you okay? But yeah, you have to spend some extra time. And that's why it's going to feel worse, right? Because you're already like, get this stuff out of my face. I'm going to pivot in a moment to talk about some preventative measures for this kind of thing. But I should kind of interject for a moment and say, like, this is something that was a huge part of my career for 8 years. And that's because I basically built prototypes for 8 years, and they either became teams or I ended up having the team that would continue to run it. So at one point I had a full-fledged prototyping team, and then before leaving the last company I was at, that was actually something where they were spinning up again a dedicated prototyping team. And it's because it got to the point where there would be, I feel like it's a good problem to have, right? I talked about the CTO at that company before. And, I think one of the, best user proxies you could ask for at a company, because he was, the customer, so to speak, when he started this all off. He was building software that he would need and then was giving it away. But what would end up happening throughout the entire 8 years that I was there was he would always have ideas and just enough programming abilities to go make them himself. But it's kind of problematic when you're software engineering team that's already feeling overworked. Deadlines are always you're always trying to rush to get the value out to customers, and or feels like you're rushing to get value to customers, but then there's always one more thing, and then the CTO has got this idea, and you're like, okay, we gotta slow down so we can breathe. And then he would end up, spinning up his own prototype, and then we're like, okay, well, shit, now we're in a position where the code got written anyway, and now someone's gonna have to inherit it. And it's probably, in my opinion, at that scale, a far worse spot if the CTO of a multi-100 person company is spinning up prototypes that we're going to have to inherit. Again, not bashing him. I think he is very in tune with what users actually need. So certainly not a negative comment, just more of an organizational challenge. And so getting to a point where we're okay, we're going to actually formalize a prototyping team again. That was something that I was going to be leading, and kind of going back to what I was doing more actively at one point. But because of this, I just wanted to mention this is something that I spent a large part of my career doing, because we would get tasked with prototyping something to prove the viability. And then if it was viable and we're like, okay, like we can get past these technical limitations, and the context is for building digital forensic software. So a lot of this stuff, it's not like you could just do a quick Google search and then say, oh yeah, like I found the code that does it. It would be a little bit more digging into understanding, like, it's not quite reverse engineering, because I think that's too loaded of a term, but like you kind of have to be a detective and understand like traces of data, how things get left behind, because when it comes to forensics, that's really what it's going to be about. So that, you know, law enforcement investigators, like, you can help build the tools for them to say, hey, look, like, we know that they're, when you use particular things, like this type of trail of data is left. Therefore, we can build you tools that will help you like discover that. So we would build these things and then prove if they're viable. And if they were, this is where it was like, okay, either my team at that time would just keep running with the prototype and try to formalize it more, or we would hand it off. And like, you know, there was at one point, like, we built a prototype for something and we were like, okay, hell yeah, this is going to be a big deal. And it got handed off to a team that was like at our other office even. So like, it wasn't just like handing it over to your neighbor in the next cubicle. It was like, no, like our I don't like calling it a satellite office. It was satellite to our headquarters, but I don't mean to like diminish the contributions of that office. But you know, so that other team at a different office took it over and built an entire product around it, which is super cool. But you end up in this situation like, okay, we built all of the original stuff that went into that, because depending on the prototype, sometimes people take prototypes and they go, great, like, you've proven the viability, we're going to scrap whatever you built because like you built it a particular way, no one's judging you, like, you're just proving viability. And great, like, now that that's been proven, let's go like design and architect how it has to be integrated into the right solution. But sometimes people take prototypes and just say like, it's working, right? Like, it's working. We don't have any, you know, necessarily concerns with how it was designed. It's not like we're looking at it and saying, got to start from scratch. So they would just take it and continue to build. But yeah, there's a lot of these situations where, especially if you have multiple prototypes and like scenarios like this that you've built up over time, where you're constantly being pulled around. And actually, like, the extension of like what I was doing mostly before leaving that company was that I kind of went back to what it was like in the very beginning when I started there. I was going around helping, right? Like, a lot of my time was spent doing that. The difference was that in the beginning, when I was at that startup, I was going around to different developers' desks and like trying to help them code specific things. And by the time I left there, it was more like I was going around to different teams in different products that I had knowledge on from either building or just historical knowledge, and helping provide like historical reasoning for things, or like providing not quite like a consultant, but like kind of like a consultant for some of the product managers as well. So I was spending a lot of time doing that, and it's a little bit different than what we're talking about here, but I think it's because the role that I had at that company had evolved into like, you know, I've even talked about this before. That was, by that time, I was doing a lot more like pure management versus coding. So it's because those types of activities started to take up more time. Okay, so I wanted to provide some context in case you're like, well, you know, if you're not new to the channel, you might have already known some of that stuff. If you are new to the channel, it's like, who's this guy talking about this stuff? Why does it matter? Which is a totally fair question. But I wanted to pivot because I got about, it says 6 minutes to CrossFit, but we'll see. I wanted to talk about some types of like preventative measures for getting into this kind of situation. And one, I mean, it's not going to be a bulletproof plan, but a thing to consider is like, if you are building something that you have an understanding that there is a possibility, say like a pretty good one, that it's going to be handed off, I would say start early on designing whatever type of documentation is going to be relevant for that project. It doesn't mean that every single line of code needs a comment. But like, there's going to be concepts that need to be documented, right? There's going to be like design decisions. This is where sometimes, like, as you're putting stuff together, you might be like, we didn't sit down and do a design doc because we were prototyping and it's going to slow us down. And like, I think that's fine, that's fair, whatever. I'm not here to say right or wrong, but if something's in place now and you have to go hand it over to people, if you decided that, along the way you made some good decisions, I think it's very helpful to try and find some way to document what those decisions are. And that way it's not like people inherit things and they go start asking all the same questions that you did, right? They're like, I don't know why Nick built it this way. I can think of 10 other ways to do it. Like, was it just the first one that Nick and team picked? Was this something that they evaluated? I don't really know. I'm nervous to go change it because like, I don't want to like undo what they did. Or maybe they start undoing and they didn't even ask, and then you find out why they're having all these problems. So I think if you can, especially if you have some inclination that things are going to be handed over, definitely try finding ways to like document, like retroactively is totally fine. Document decisions that were made, right? At least some type of minimal documentation to get up and running, some minimal documentation around how to diagnose issues. Again, like, these might not be things that when you were building a prototype or an initial version of something, these might not be things where you were like, they're at the top of your mind to go to document and to make perfect. And that might be just something that you have to close the gap on, right? Is like, okay, this is about to get handed over to a team. Oh shit, we didn't go build in telemetry and diagnostics and proper logging. Like, you might want to tell that team like immediately, right? They're about to go inherit something that they need to work on. If there isn't all that stuff, it's not necessarily the end of the world, but it's like, you might want to go prioritize that before you get too far. Okay, so I think like a good thought, or like a good thought exercise you can try is like, imagine that you were going to be the person inheriting something, and what things would you want to know so that you could be successful? And I would say try formalizing some type of documentation in some way that helps with that. I recognize that that's like a happy path, I guess. If you know what's going to be handed over, you have time to prepare that kind of stuff. So if that's not the case, if for whatever reason it's a team switch, like, so you're leaving the team, or I don't know, some product is reorged. Like, I've had literally the team I was on before at Microsoft, we owned a service, and at the same time, totally unrelated, but at the same time that I switched teams to where I am now, my current team inherited that service. And when I say my current team, I mean my larger team that reports up to my manager. So like my group. So kind of funny, very coincidental, but like that, the ownership of that service got reorged, if I can call it that. And that type of thing comes with challenges too, but at least that was mature, and there was documentation. There was like, because it's a service, there's like battle cards for being able to, help with live site issues and diagnose things. So that's probably a good spot to be in. But there's still going to be people with questions. So I would say, even if it's a sort of call it a surprise that something's going to be moving or you're going to be moving, I would try to come up with a plan where there's alignment on the transition, right? Some time-boxed transition. I did this with another team that I had as well, and the difference there was like there was a reorg essentially, and I inherited a team, and we came up with a strategy that said for this period of time, like this is where we will be learning from you and leveraging you for on-call, and like basically we're a bit of a hybrid on certain things until there's no parking. Okay. That sucks. There we go. And yeah, just coming up with an alignment, because the reality is like you're going to build resentment and friction and have discomfort if like people aren't aligned on what that is. If you have a time boxed window, like that gives you some guidance around like we should probably figure some shit out during this time, because if we're not using that time to transition things properly, like we should expect that it's going to feel rough after. So hope that's helpful. Like I said, if you thought that was interesting and valuable, then if you want to consider sharing that back to the Experienced Dev subreddit for that topic that was regarding basically getting pulled back into projects that you handed off, that would be super cool. And I'm at CrossFit, so thanks so much. I'll see you next time.